Today we're going to talk about using Microsoft Forms and Power Apps for Business Central. So this, even though we're kind of looking at this from the standpoint of nonprofits, these things could be used basically by anybody who's using Business Central, Microsoft 360, Office 365, Dynamics 365. So if you're in that in that kind of Microsoft stack, it would be useful. We see a lot with nonprofits and NGOs. A lot of times they do need to incorporate data from a lot of disparate sources. Sometimes people that don't have access to their system. So people like volunteers or employees that are at outreach locations, they also have a tendency to be very budget conscious. So some of what could be useful is not having additional apps attached to your Business Central environment that handle these things, but maybe developing some of this in-house. So what we're doing in this entire webinar series is we're just looking at how these cloud-based solutions for small and medium businesses can be leveraged for nonprofits in a better manner. 3 user-friendly options for collecting data that we're going to talk about today are Microsoft Forms, what I'm referring to as Power Cards. They're just referred to as cards in the Power Apps world, and then, of course, Power Apps. So we'll talk about use cases for each method in this webinar and where you may and may not want to use the different pieces. We have in previous webinars talked a bit about data collection from the SharePoint standpoint or from the Excel standpoint. Those, of course, are also relevant, very relevant options, but sometimes you'll want things that you can have other users just maybe scan a QR code, be able to fill out a form and grab that data. So that's where you would do something like this as opposed to having somebody log into a smart sheet or an Excel spreadsheet, that kind of thing. And then, of course, as I mentioned, you can reach out to Jody if you want to discuss more with us. So, where did it go? All right. So before deciding your best approach in this, when you're dealing with data collection, you do have some different things that you're going to want to think about, right? What is the purpose of the data? Does this data need to be tied into the ERP? Does it need to go into, say, a journal in your Business Central environment, for example, to be posted as ledger entries? Is it something you're collecting from the CRM side? That kind of thing. So what's really the purpose of your data and who's going to be submitting it? Are these going to be employees of your organization? Or are they going to be volunteers? So are they people that would actually have logins to your central system, or would they be maybe working from kind of outside of your system and not have the logins? Where is the data going to go? Is it going to go to Business Central, SharePoint, Excel, that kind of thing? And then how complex is that app? So, for example, will it include workflows? Do you need to have a lot of does it need to be multi-screen, right? So we'll look at an example of that as well. And then, of course, before you move forward, you want to test your solution. After you've determined what you want to try, you want to test it before you execute it. And then sometimes you may unwind and say, you know what, we need to go with something a little bit different than this for whatever reason. So we'll talk a bit about that here also going forward. And I keep clicking the wrong button there. Okay, so what we're going to look at, and this is a really quick session, so hopefully we'll have the opportunity to go into more detail on some of these in the future. But first, we're going to look at Microsoft Forms. So this is a really lightweight application. It's independent of the Power Platform. So whereas cards and apps are part of the Power Platform, Microsoft Forms is completely independent of that. You would see it if you were to look in your Microsoft apps. It's its own little app that you can do. It's definitely a no-code solution. You're not going to be adding formulas and so forth to it. But one of the advantages is it will capture those analytics. So if you use something for survey collection, for example, this would be a replacement for that. It's great for things like surveys, quizzes, polls, and you'll see here other light data collections. So we're going to use it for something a little bit different. But the great thing is it will capture those analytics for you, tell you how many respondents you've had, that kind of thing. So that's the Microsoft Forms piece. The cards within the Power Apps world, they're part of that ecosystem, of course. They're also lightweight. In this case, the user interface is very simple. But they are kind of, you could look at them as micro apps. So they're really little teeny tiny apps. They do have more robust functionality than the forms. So you can hook them up to your enterprise data and a variety of connectors that you would use in the Power Apps world as well. But they are quite simple in terms of appearance. You can also take advantage of workflows, Power FX, which is the language that you could use for putting in some of those functions or formulas, things like that. So they have on the back end, they're more robust than the forms, but on the front end, the visual is a lot simpler, and we'll take a look at that as well. These are great for light data collection also. These also integrate with Teams, so you could actually develop one of these and you could put it onto one of your Teams channels. So the cards will work that way. And they're also good for embedding in other apps. So you can put together a series of cards into another app. And then, of course, Power Apps is the biggest beast of the three. Power Apps allow for robust application development. You can start from no code and work your way up to complex. So you have a lot of options there. They are highly integrated with data sources, right? So all of those connectors that you might want to connect to in a Power App, pretty much most of them are going to be out there. So even things that aren't a part of the Microsoft stack, you would find connectors for those things as well. So very well integrated to things. And then, of course, you can use the Power FX language to create functions, formulas, do really elaborate coding if you'd like. So as such, there is a steeper learning curve to the Power Apps world, but it is, if you can get started and you sort of work your way up, you can certainly get there. These are great for sophisticated applications, so things where you might need several screens, you've got multiple data connections to different data sources. They're also great for integrated workflows. So if you have a lot of Power Automate workflows created and you have different things that need to be triggered, this is a good place to do that. So one thing to note about Power Apps is there's also then within Power Apps, there are subsets of apps. So you could have model-driven apps or Canvas apps. There's a lot of complexity that you might find as you start to dig into some of those, the different options you have for apps. So it's not a bad idea to get out there, get yourself a trial, and start taking a look at it. So without further ado, we are going to attempt to share my screen. And let me get screen shared. And I think that's what we want. Okay, so hopefully you can see my screen right now. So if you can't, hopefully somebody can just ping something and let me know if it's not actually sharing, but to me it's telling me it's sharing. Okay, so as I mentioned, I'm going to start over here on the Microsoft Forms side of things. So this is really, you would go to forms.office.com, or you could pull up Microsoft Forms and get yourself, Google it, get yourself here. And what you would see is you have a whole lot of options for forms. So you can actually create a new form or a new quiz directly from here. And you've also got lots of templates sitting out here as well. So you could work through the various templates that are out there. Very, very convenient way to get started. So I created a couple in here just to show some different options. So I've got, for example, an expense reimbursement form. This is one kind of form that I might create in the system. So this is my community kitchen expense reimbursement for, say, a volunteer that maybe has some expense out there and they need to submit something, right? So that's one option. It gives the option of uploading a copy of the receipt. This is based on just a template that's already existing in the Microsoft Forms that's already out there. Another one I've got here is my volunteer registration. So I'm going to walk through this one for you, and you can see you've got fields. You can decide what kind of field these need to be. You can basically just work your way through however you want to get this set up. So the field format is going to be what you tell it to be. Again, there's a little bit more that you can do in terms of editing these, but as you template and then add fields, take things off that you don't like, so on and so forth. There's a couple of things one thing I really like about this. So this collect responses, one of the things that's neat is that you can actually have it generate a QR code so that, for example, if I'm at some place that's maybe a community volunteer event where we've got a lot of different organizations presenting things, I could actually have somebody just grab the QR code that I have set up for this with their phone, and it will take them right to the form. So they would be able to submit that form right from their phone, right? And you can actually preview what this is going to look like in both the regular view, or how is it going to look on a mobile phone as well, right? So I've got my computer view and then my mobile view as well. But that would let me see exactly what those users are going to see when they scan that QR code. So the other thing that's great about this is, like in things like SurveyMonkey and so forth, you can actually see the responses you've got. So you can collect the responses, look at the details of those. So I would be able to immediately afterwards say, oh yeah, we had this many people scan that code, signed up for it, and so forth. What we're going to do here then is I am going to complete one of these, and just to show basically the simplicity of this, I guess. And I will go with, we had, let's see, I don't think I had Daffy Duck in there yet. And I'm just going to put in a phone number. We'll just use and an email address. Okay, and then we're going to say, why are you interested? That kind of thing. Where would you like to work within this? We'll say they want to work in the kitchen, and what days, times, and things work best. So this one, might be Thursday or Saturday, and we'll say they wanted to do then any additional information that they might want to add. So that's just going to say, okay, it's submitted. I got that form submitted. We could submit another one if we wanted. But the thing I wanted to point out about this is you can also send this data. So that data sitting here, I can look at my responses and so forth. But what I did in this scenario, so this in the Microsoft Forms, I can send my data to things like an Excel spreadsheet or a SharePoint, that kind of thing. I don't have in Microsoft Forms that massive list of data connectors that we'll see over on the Power App side, but I can have that data sent to a place like this, right? So I've got a SharePoint site here, and it's gone ahead and added Daffy Duck to this SharePoint site. What I can also do then is I can have that integrate with other applications. So for example, I have a Power Automate flow set up that basically says, okay, when something is shared to that SharePoint site, it's not only going to add it to that list, but I have a workflow set up that's going to automatically add a new volunteer record. So in here, I'm storing my volunteers as vendors, and it hasn't updated yet. We will have to give it a second. So it's going to eventually put Daffy Duck in here into these records for me. Taking a little extra time for things to move on my computer right now. And it's going to execute anything else that I happen to have sitting out there. So in this particular scenario, when I have that new volunteer record created, we can see I've got Daffy Duck created out here. I have that record created, but with a status of blocked to begin with. So it's going to create that volunteer record for me in the system. And again, what I'm showing you here, you could do also with a Power App or with your Power Pages as well. But oops, it's supposed to create it blocked. It has to go through that in the background, through all of that, and my test environment's a little bit slow, but it's going to create that record for me. It's also going to send some different notifications. So in my, in my Outlook inbox, what I would ultimately see, I would ultimately receive a notification of this. And so if you come over here, you can see I've got an indication that I got a response from the community on that one. And then I'm also it's going to follow through the rest of the workflows that are associated with that. And then ultimately, I would receive, I've got a couple, my other email, Daffy Duck is going to receive something, basically they receive a response that says, hey, yeah, we got your application or your registration. No, it's not. It's taken too long to show up in here, but those things will ultimately work their way through here, right? So it's going to come through and it's going to say, all right, you, we've got new volunteer orientation coming up. So what I'm going to have you do, oh, here it is. Here's the new volunteer registration. So this would be on the approval side. So internally, it's created my record for Daffy Duck in my Business Central environment. So I have that sitting out here. But what it's telling me is, hey, this is a new volunteer. This record is blocked to begin with, and you need to come out to the system and either approve or reject this. So in this particular case, I'm going to say approved. I could enter comments if I wanted. So that's all part of the setup that I have with that workflow. And what that will do then is that will for Daffy Duck there, it will, once it updates, it will remove that block on that account. So it will take that out. It'll take a second to refresh. But ultimately, Daffy Duck will be official volunteer. We'll get it moved to that, right? So once that refreshes, you would see that. And then on the email side, it's also then going to, once I've accepted that, send an email to Daffy Duck, because that's part of that workflow that I've created in the system. So essentially what we're doing there is we are just tying a Microsoft form to some of the other functionality that we have in that system. And again, it just is taking a minute for this to update. But it's going to update that record for me, and then it's going to send an email to Daffy Duck that's going to show that email that says, you need to schedule this orientation. So that's going to be the next piece of that, right? It's going to say, yep, this is what you've got to do next. And he will be able to go, like I said, that's going to be in that new volunteer orientation. And again, in that one, what we've done is we've set this up so that Daffy Duck could then come out and select which session he's going to attend. So that's all using just the forms. And whoops, I have that one turned off, I guess. That is forms. And so that's why he didn't receive that yet. And then using some Power Automate in conjunction with those forms. But it's going to work with my Business Central there. And then I can, again, track that data, as I noted. So again, you're just using the Microsoft Forms. And in conjunction with that, I had 3 steps in my Power Automate. You could actually pull these together, so they don't all have to be separate, but I had developed them at different times. Over on the Power App side, however, you're actually building either a card or an application. So what I mentioned about the cards, and you'll see that here, cards are going to be these really basic looking items. So this is really what a card would look like. I could create a volunteer log card where the volunteer comes in, they put their ID in here, they select the program that they volunteered for, and here we'll take a look at it as it would be seen. So again, it's a very simple user interface. There's not a lot of flexibility with regard to making this, snazzier than it already is. So it's not going to have sort of that branded look that our form has, but it's going to additional integration, or these cards can also be, as I had mentioned, built into other applications, other Power Apps that you have out there. You could use them there. But basically, you'd be entering your volunteer ID, what program, the date that you volunteered, and then start time and end time. And I can then, behind the scenes of this one, actually I can create a basically a variable. So I could come out here and create a variable for my hours to hold my hours and say, okay, I want to subtract the end time from the start time from the end time, and I want to hold that result in my hours so that it can then create a record. So I can have this record then created and then ultimately sent perhaps to a journal over in Business Central, right? So maybe this gets sent to a statistical journal so I can track actual volunteer hours to programs, which is a new function that we have, those statistical journal entries in Business Central. So that's one option here. And that's it's a part of the Power Apps, but it's just called a card. So it is not the sophisticated Power App piece that we're going to look at next. So the Power Apps themselves, you would find up here. So one that I just think is such a great little app that you could create. And again, there are other ways that you can do this, but you can create an expense reporting app. So this is something that we see repeatedly. I see repeatedly, at least, as a request from users and or from prospective clients. And that becomes, we need a way to be able to collect different expense account records and then get those into Business Central, but in a way that's certainly easier than what we typically would run into on the business if you're trying to manually make those entries, right? So you have somebody that wants to enter their expenses. This is just a basic app that can be created. This is also part of a template app. So what you could do is you could create this app and then you could modify it, right? So I can use the template to create this, but there's a lot I can do to modify this. So this is really how this would look to the user. They would be able to see any of their expenses that are sitting out there. And again, I could do a little app like this for volunteer hours if they wanted to track volunteer hours or all kinds of things. So really cool option here within the Power Apps as well in terms of expense reporting. And in these, as we'll take a look at here, of course, this is where I mentioned it gets much more sophisticated. So you are going to attach to your data sources. I have 4 connectors, I think, attached to this app, but you might only have a couple connectors. It just depends on where you want that data to flow. Those are things you're going to want to think about in advance. But what the Power App itself is going to allow me to do is, again, create those multiple screens. So I can have all sorts of screens. And you can do this in a no-code fashion, or you can also, there's also a lot of learning material in terms of all of this out on the Microsoft documentation site as well as the learning site. So note that this is not how this normally is. It's because I'm sharing my window. It is definitely struggling right now. But what you can see over here is I've got my different areas then within that report, and I'm really just creating these different screens. And then behind the scenes, I am telling it, what does this need to look like? And then where does this data need to be, what is it attached to, right? So I can set up that data source and then attach this to certain things. So for these expenses, I might say, yeah, I want to have this app available for my people that are out in the field to use so they can track any expenses. For example, if it's a food bank and they're out and they are delivering food, but they need to buy gas, maybe we want to be able to track that. And they want to go out and be able to look at those expenses and see the status of those. So I'm still going to have all of the tables that I have built behind this, but what I might do then is create a Power Automate flow that when I've got an expense like this and it gets submitted, so over on the screen where an expense I might go to this open expense and then hit submit for it, it's going to go ahead and create perhaps a general journal line that's going to be sent to a journal batch specific for expenses, right? Maybe I create a journal batch and I say, every time this happens, I want you to send over what program or so maybe some information that might be used in dimensions in the system. What program was it? Maybe what site was it? That kind of thing, just so I can track that from the GL standpoint as well, without having to go to like sending all of this data, or out to, say, an Excel spreadsheet, and then importing that Excel spreadsheet. So that's the kind of thing that you can do with Power Automate in conjunction. So we talked about Power Automate in the last session, but that's what you can do in conjunction with your Power Apps. Typically, you would see that maybe working together. You can even actually have it build in some Power BI functionality as well to tie in together with this, right? So maybe I want, yes, users can see their expenses, but I want to, from the Power BI side, have a dashboard that shows those things. So a couple of things I wanted to point out. It's very easy to get started here. So as we looked at the Microsoft Forms, there were a lot of options for templates out there that are already set up. As you could see, you're not going to see those options on the card side. A card is just a card, so you'll just open it up and really basically get started. Pretty basic. But we do have a lot of different things you could try out here. These are just some examples, and this is part of the Microsoft AI piece. It's coming up with things using some AI in the background. There are a lot more templates available in the system, so I could say start with an app template here. But just to show you basically how easy this is going to be, is you're going to come out here and it's going to go ahead and build the tables that you need for this. So if I have tables in the background here, essentially what I'm doing ultimately, creating this app, and then again, using Power Automate, grabbing specific data from the tables that I have out here, and then sending that data to Business Central. So very easy to create your own applications without having to go ahead and purchase, for example, an extension. That's the kind of the beauty of the Power App world there.